Hey, everybody. Welcome to another week of our mini podcast. I am really excited for our guest this week, Professor Daina Castro. You may hear us call each other Daina and Robin today because we work together. But of course, if you have the opportunity to be in a class with this amazing instructor, you will know her as Professor Castro. A little bit more about her before I get started today. Daina is actually the coordinator of our marriage and family therapy specialization within the counseling program. She also works in private practice as a therapist. So I'm excited to have her perspective today because I think the perspective, not only from someone's lived experience, but also from their work as a therapist, I think that brings a rich conversation to us as we move into feelings and emotions. And I know the last couple of weeks, one thing we've talked about a lot is how to recognize thoughts that may be illogical, not representative of reality, and how to put a little distance between us and those thoughts. But at the same time, and something I know I've already been driving home a little bit, is that the feeling we're having is still valid. The feeling is always valid. And I think that's such a simple concept, but also kind of a radical concept for us to wrap our minds around as humans. So that's what Daina's been kind enough to join us to talk about today. So Daina, I'll invite you, if you want to say a little bit more about that, or even share a little of, your relationship to that topic, anywhere you'd like to start with us today.
Well, first off, hi everyone. I'm really happy to be here with all of you today. We're going to talk about something that I talk about almost on a daily basis, emotions and how we relate to them and how they stand out for us and how they show up in our bodies and in our minds and in our hearts. I didn't always feel really connected to my feelings. It was something that I really had to learn. And like Robin said, it's sometimes I think something we think is so simple, right? To say I'm angry or I'm sad or I'm happy. But for me, I did not grow up with that language. I am Latina. I grew up in a Nicaraguense home. My mom is from Nicaragua, and so are my grandparents. And the way that we talked about feelings was, well, if you're sad, go and clean. Or if you're sad, it was kind of like you're wasting time. There was a better way to use our time growing up. And so as I got older and I began to feel these things that I had no understanding what they were, but I began to understand that it was anxiety and depression. It was something that I had to have someone teach me how to do. And it was really through my own experience in therapy that I learned what all these feelings that we use, right, that are on feeling charts, I think are amazing. But I had to use one of those. I was 18 in college and I had someone teaching me how to say that I'm upset, I'm sad, I'm frustrated. And I think it's really just such a gift to be able to talk about our feelings because while some of them may be heavier than others, it was something that really, ultimately led me to this career today, to be in a program where I teach others how to talk about their feelings and then also work with other individuals to teach them how to, just be their best versions of themselves as well.
I love that. And I do think embracing our feelings is a big part of being the best version of ourselves, which is actually what this class is about. And I like what you said about growing up not having the language to talk about feelings or even necessarily the permission within your house to talk about it. I relate to that piece of it. There was a lot for me of kind of shaming for being too sensitive. I think in particular, it was the message was don't be overly sensitive, suck it up, put on a thicker skin kind of a thing. And I think even today, for me, is a journey back to giving myself permission to have all of my feelings. And you mentioned that one too, all of our feelings, right? Feelings are valid, and it's not just the good ones or just the ones we were hoping to have at that moment. It's all the feelings. Would you talk to that a little bit more?
Yeah, going back into where I grew up, I definitely had this idea because I could only feel one thing that our feelings were put into two categories. We either had good feelings or bad feelings. And it was something that I tried to chase for a long time. The good feeling was obviously being happy. And so I wanted to be happy all the time. I learned that, just like things don't always last forever, our feelings don't last forever. And so all of the feelings means those things that might feel a little bit heavier. I always like to think that there are no bad feelings. There's just ones that feel heavier than others, right? So like being sad, it doesn't always feel great to be sad, right? There's some crying maybe that comes with that, or maybe some heavy thoughts that come with it as well. But I think feeling all our feelings is just allowing all of them to be valid, right? If you are sad about something or if you are angry about something, it means that a boundary was crossed. And so that's a valid thing to experience. If you are sad because maybe you didn't do well on an exam that you spent a lot of time studying for, that's a valid feeling to have too, right? And so just like we want to feel happy because that feels great, it's also important for us to experience those other things as well. That's part of all the feelings that we have.
Yeah, that's everything that makes us human. And I
Mhm.
think we forget that. We're not always honoring the whole human experience if we're just chasing what we've called the positive feelings. And something you mentioned too is they end, both the positives and the negatives. Like I think when we're happy or content or whatever positive feeling we were enjoying for that time, if we feel it shifting a little bit, we can almost be reaching for it like, wait, don't leave me.
Hold on.
Yeah. And the reverse of that, though, is that I think sometimes why we're hesitant to embrace negative feelings is we don't understand that they will also pass. You know, there's that cliche, this too shall pass, but it's true. And I think what's ironic about it is that they pass more quickly if we embrace them. At least that's what I find for myself. You can tell me if that speaks to you, that I find that if I'm trying to avoid an uncomfortable or negative feeling, if that's sadness or anger or, whatever that might be, if I'm trying to sort of push it away and distract myself from it, if I'm picking up my phone and going on social media and watching TV and all the things to try to just get it out of my head, what happens is that it really hangs out with me. So
Yeah.
it's almost counterintuitive, but if I step into it for a minute, if I go, you know what? I'm feeling kind of sad right now.
Mhm.
Why am I sad? Oh, I think it's this thing that I'm a little disappointed about or a little hurt about. Like breathe into it. It's valid that I feel this way. It's okay that I feel this way. Oh, hello, sadness. To honor it for a little bit, ironically, then like that'll shift into another feeling and another feeling. But that only happens if I greet it, if I say hello and sit in the room with it for a little bit.
I kind of like to think about our feelings like we're having a house party and we are allowing these guests to come in, right? And I think a lot of the time, a lot of us say, well, we'll have joy. I'm gonna talk about joy because I like Inside Out, and I think that's a really great movie for everybody. But we have joy walk in, right? Or surprise, or any of the ones that some of you may say are the good feelings. And so we enjoy letting them stay in our house because they feel good, right? We want to experience more of that. And then maybe we have anger or disgust or embarrassment knock on the door and you're like, "No way, you can't come in." But they're going to keep banging on the door. They're not going to go away. It's just going to get more and more annoying, right? It's just something that's going to keep piling on for you. And so I also feel the same way. If I ignore my anxiety, it's not going to go away. It's just going to create more and more anxiety in my body because that's really where I carry my anxiety. It's in my body. And so I might feel it in my tummy because that's where I feel anxious. I feel like there's lots of butterflies in there. Sometimes I feel it in my throat if there's something that I may have to talk about and I may feel a little bit nervous about. But right, we may think that by going on our phones or maybe watching a Netflix show, we're distracting ourselves, but really that emotion doesn't go away. It's just there.
You just mentioned so many things that I think will be valuable points of this conversation. And one I think I want to kind of dive into a little bit more first is it's interesting because I heard you say anger, disgust, embarrassment. And as you were saying that, I was thinking just being skilled at naming lots of different emotions. A lot of us don't have the vocabulary as we're growing up. And even as adults, we don't have the vocabulary. And then when we don't have words for it, we can struggle to explain and articulate to someone else. We can also struggle even to be in touch with it ourselves. So I wonder, what do you see as the value of just having a bigger vocabulary for feelings?
For me, something that I experienced when I went to therapy as an adult, which is really where I learned the vocabulary for the feelings and everything that pops up. It was being able to understand what was happening in my body. I think for a lot of my life, I knew that there was just things that felt different but I didn't know how to put a name for it. And once I understood what it was, right? Once I knew how to name, I'm anxious. I then knew how to respond to it. I felt like before I had a name to things, because it just didn't have a name and it was uncomfortable in my body, I just wanted to get rid of it. And I know now we can't just get rid of feelings just like that. We respond to them in different ways. And so I had to learn how to respond to my anxiety, how to take care of my anxiety. With that, though, I also understood that my anxiety was there for a reason. And I think that was the biggest thing, too, that I understood my feelings were popping up for different reasons. It didn't just pop up one day and said that I was anxious. It popped up because that was something that was created when I was younger to protect myself. My depression didn't just pop up one day because I was just sad about something. It popped up because there was some really deep hurt feelings that I didn't know how to respond to. And so I think knowing how to name your feelings, number one, I think it puts you more at ease to understand that there's just different things that we have in our bodies and in our minds. But number two, I think it's understanding how to respond to them in different ways because I treat my feelings differently. I don't do the same thing for when I'm feeling sad, for when I'm feeling anxious, because they ask for different things and they pop up for different reasons.
Again, you're naming so many good things. So one thing you're naming is the reason they might be showing up and responding to them differently. And I want to go back to all of that. Before we touch on that, I think it's really powerful also that you mentioned showing up in our bodies, that our feelings really may show up in physical spaces. And I don't think we always know that. I think for a lot of us, what we feel physically and what we feel mentally are very separated. And we don't always acknowledge the connection between the two. Where do you notice your feelings show up in your body?
I feel it. So it kind of depends on the feeling, right? But I would say the feeling I'll speak on right now is anxiety because that's the one that, kind of really began my journey with mental health. I know that I'm anxious when I feel stiff in my shoulders.
Mhm.
And if I feel really tight, then there's something popping up for me. And I oftentimes find that we feel it first in our bodies before we have thoughts about it.
Uh,
And I think it's so interesting, right? Because I do agree. I don't think a lot of people realize really just how connected you are to your body. Your body is the first part that's telling you, hey, this is maybe unsafe. Maybe we shouldn't do that. Or, hey, I feel like a boundary was crossed there. And so something is popping up for us. And
mhm.
I find that a lot of clients also feel it in their bodies too. Of some of my clients struggle with anxiety, and so they feel it in their throat because that's what we use to speak, right? Some of them experience it in their stomachs, and they might feel, and maybe some of you ever have felt that too, when we maybe feel a little bit nauseous, or we just feel like our stomachs hurt. And another thing I think other people don't consider is we also feel it in the temperature of our body. So some of us might get really hot if there's something that's making you nervous, or you might also feel very cold sometimes. Maybe when you're sad, you might feel a little bit cold. Just a lot of different things that we might not pay attention to, even when we sweat. That's also our body responding to our feelings as well. I'm wondering, Robin, how does your body show up for you and your feelings?
Yeah, as you're talking about it, one thing I'm thinking about, a lot of times it's my chest and my stomach, and sometimes I'll describe it like there's a tornado in here. I
Yeah.
also deal with a lot of anxiety. So when I'm very anxious and things are pent up for me, this is often where it is. And it was a therapist who had to teach me to key into that. I'm often up here, right? I'm a professor and I've learned all these theories about all these things, so I can talk it to death. And I would come into her and say, oh, I think this is happening for me this week, and it's because of this, and it's connected to this thing in my childhood, and I'm having these irrational thoughts. And she would stop me and go, Robin, I want you to drop into your body right now. Where is it? And I'd be like, and then I'd go, oh, oh, it's in my chest, or oh, it's kind of down in my lower stomach. And it was really interesting for me to drop down into that and honor that and realize that if I was overanalyzing it, I was actually keeping myself kind of pent up in that space. So learning how to drop in and name the feeling in my body and understand its connection to that word, like anxious or scared or lonely or sad or whatever that might be. Um, And something else I'm thinking of as you're talking about that, because I've heard you mention a few times that feeling something in our body might be a sign that something, like you said, a couple times you've said maybe a boundary was crossed. So you've mentioned that it could be a signal that something external happened that is
Yeah.
problematic. And maybe we're not even comfortable naming that that was problematic, but our body might signal to us before our mind even does. Um, will you say
I
a bit more about that?
just how we're able to acknowledge sometimes we're uncomfortable, like, well, somebody said something that maybe wasn't funny, or somebody touched me in a way that I didn't feel comfortable. I think sometimes when a moment like that happens, the word that popped up to mind is confrontation.
Mm.
And I find that a lot of us may struggle with confronting somebody about that, even if it's something that we don't feel right with. Sometimes our feelings, I think we push them aside and care more about somebody else's emotions, and that's something that pops up. And so I think it's, with the boundary crossing, that's something I talk about a lot with clients, and also something I had to learn myself of how to set that with people in my family and in my work life and just in a lot of different spaces. But it's your body saying, I feel unsafe right now. And so we need to either, and maybe some of you have heard it, right? Fight or flight. But we also have another one that's called freeze. And some of us might just not do anything and just stay there. Your body's understanding and asking itself, what is the right thing to do here? Sometimes we might not feel comfortable doing anything about it. But the boundary crossing is before we might, have that cognition, we might have that thought, right? Your body's representing and telling you how it feels about it.
I'm glad you're mentioning boundary crossing because that's like a little primer because we're going to have a week later in this class specifically on boundaries. So I'm glad you're kind of touching on that for us. And one thing I'm thinking about, it's interesting because you're talking about our body may be a key to something external that is happening that we're not quite acknowledging. And I often think also about the way my body might be a key to something in my mind that I've distorted a little bit. So sometimes I think there's a danger there that's not really there. If I go back to our topics from this last week, especially, sometimes I've created a story already about all the bad things that are about to happen. And, I've been engaging in catastrophizing, right? Like, we use those examples, like that person didn't get back to my message, or I bumped into them in the hallway and they didn't smile. And I've already written the story about how I might have irritated them. And oh, it might have been because of this thing the other day. And now maybe they're going to create this rift and this project is going to go badly and this is going to happen. That's going to happen. My body will also like go, why am I all, oh, because I'm telling myself this story. Is there any evidence for that story? Actually, no. That whole thing just came because somebody didn't look back at me in the hallway. But to our topic this week, I also have to say, it's okay that I feel that way. It's human to feel rejected by other people when we don't get the connection we were looking for in a moment. It's all right that I had a reaction of feeling concerned or rejected. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that story was true. So I can validate myself at the same time that I can look at an interpretation or a story I just wrote.
I love thinking about things that way because when I talk about cognitive distortions, the way that I talk about it with clients is some things are fact and some things are fiction. And some of the stories we tell ourselves might be fiction, but our feelings are not fiction, right? They are popping up for something. And like you said, right? I think something I hear a lot from my clients because I work with women in their early 20s, and they might say, well, he didn't respond to my text. And I feel, I have strong feelings about that. Maybe he is not doing all these things that you've created in your mind with the story, but it makes sense why you feel that way. And that from, a client perspective, there were times in their childhood or times in their past relationships where people did hurt them. And so they have a response to that. And so the story they're making up with their new partner, right? It might be built in fiction that they're creating in their minds, but the feeling is valid there, right? It's popping up for a reason.
Mhm. And the same, I know for me, one reason I've often written that story that someone is mad at me is that my mom would get mad at me a lot. So there's some deeper work I can do around that, but also in the moment, I can just know, you know what, Robin, it's okay that you're having that reaction to that. It makes sense based on your experience. I can exercise a kind of self-compassion and just kind of hold that for myself. So I think honoring feelings is a big piece of this for me that helps me kind of get back to my center. Something else you mentioned a little bit ago is thinking about how to respond to it and how to like take care of yourself or care for what that feeling needs. Would you talk a little bit more about how do you assess that and what are some of the things that you do to respond?
I think I'll start off by saying not everybody uses the same things to feel better, right? And something that we talk about when we focus on feelings, it's coping skills. And coping skills are basically skills that you use to cope with the emotion that you have. And then, like I said, everybody has a different thing. When I'm working with clients, we think about three different things that might make them feel better. And some things that some of my clients have said is they like to spend time with their dogs because that is very comforting for them. Some of them like to go on walks. One of my clients loves to go to the beach and she just sits there and she finds a lot of peace at that time. For me, what I like to use, because again, going back to where we feel it in our bodies, when I feel anxious, I feel like I have static going all over my body. And so I have like all this voltage and energy that I need to get rid of. And so for me to feel calm, it's not by doing a calm exercise. I find that I need to be very active when I want to get rid of my anxiety. So I love to run. And it is a difficult thing to do sometimes. And it is there's a lot of high impact in that. But I find that getting rid of that energy is really what makes me feel better. But I know for you, something you've mentioned is pottery. And can you talk about how that helps you in your feelings?
Yeah, and I should mention for the students that Dana is the person that Orlando and I referenced, our friend who runs. And it's interesting because what we're touching on right now is flow, right? We introduced flow as a part of mindfulness. I think flow comes back in when we think about embracing emotions or even leaving space for thoughts to evolve. I know for me, when I'm having a really off day. And I think, to be honest, I think I'm having one today. I had kind of a distressful day yesterday between my dad and some doctor stuff and this and that. And it's like, it's all still in here. This will probably be an evening for me where I go to the pottery studio because once I get lost in that pottery, the feelings can float around a little bit and I can give them, I can almost see them floating around. And I'm just sort of honoring that they're floating for a little while and letting them be without trying to get them out of the way because I need to do something productive and I want to focus on this other thing and just let them be. And it's interesting how they've evolved and shifted. It makes me think about the party too. I think for me, pottery in a weird way is like it's the pot, it's the party where the feelings get to come hang out. Maybe they're doing their pottery too. I don't know. But by the time I go home, things are settled a little bit more because there's been space for those feelings to just exist without me chasing them away.
I think that's what I feel like I've learned a lot from my feelings. It's I don't need to get rid of them, right? I don't need to not let them into the house. I don't need to ignore them. I, in a way, kind of need to befriend them because and also when we talk about coping skills, right? I don't mean it to say like, oh, we're getting rid of that feeling, right? It's just how do we help that feeling exist?
Because
Be-
if we don't, and you touched on this earlier, like there's a danger in not acknowledging, not befriending it, not allowing it to exist. When we try to push it away, I think that actually hurts us more. Would you would you speak to that a little bit from your practice?
I feel like, and I talk about feelings in the way with my clients of, I think a lot of them have megaphones. And sometimes we can think about them just like as a heckler that's there, that's just, using their normal voice and talking to you like, hey, I need you to acknowledge me. And, like you were saying with the pottery, if when you acknowledge that, then they use their inside voice and they're like, okay, I'm acknowledged, I feel heard. But when we don't acknowledge them, right, then our feelings get a megaphone and it's in your mind. And for me, I'll talk of why I talk about anxiety, right? It's because that's what I feel, and that's what I feel most connected to. And the feeling that is kind of the one that has a microphone in my mind. When I don't acknowledge it, it's just this mind that's kind of running in my this voice that's screaming in my mind and saying all these,
You're anxious, you're anxious, you're anxious.
yeah. And so it's something that I've learned that I have to acknowledge it because then that voice gets quieter. I think oftentimes we think if we ignore it, that voice goes away. And maybe some of you have noticed it just gets louder and louder, right? That embarrassment where you're like, oh, someone saw me. I don't know, maybe if you slipped or fell somewhere, right? And that voice is just, oh, one person saw me. And if you don't acknowledge it, then it could just get bigger and bigger. And then you just create this kind of like this army of people yelling at you. And so I've had to learn, and I still struggle with it. I won't say that I'm perfect. And I think that's the thing that we can grow with our feelings and learn how to work with them, but it doesn't mean that sometimes it's not hurtful or that voice isn't big. Sometimes we are human, and that's just part of feelings. That some of them sometimes are just stronger than other times. Kind of just depending on the experience. And I find too that things that used to bother me when I was younger are different now that I'm older. It's probably something that I would consider now different in the level of seriousness as I'm older, that that voice is more present. But I've learned to, kind of speak with that anxiety and see why it's showing up, what's the reasoning there, and then going back to what we were saying, right, of how can I help it? What can I do for it?
I love that. Because if we don't engage, we've mentioned one thing is I love how you said that, like it's got a megaphone, like it's just going to get louder and louder in your ear. I think that then sometimes that shows up inadvertently in our interactions with other people. If I'm not honest with myself about how I'm feeling, it shows up in me acting out against a partner or my child or my parent or whatever that is. And I'm not even sure why I just snapped at that person. So it can harm interpersonal relationships. The other part that's really a strong interest for me is how it can affect us physically. It can manifest as health problems because if we're in that fight or flight and we're holding it in, that's not good for us in the long term to have the stress hormones floating in there. And then that shows up in different forms of sickness. So we owe it to ourselves to invite our feelings to the party and say, hi, how are you? What would you like to say right now?
Yeah, I there's lots of studies too, right, about how stress shows up in our bodies. And there's even research on when you're sick and you're stressed, it takes you a longer time to recover. You have a lot of cortisol running through your body. And so to even consider that, right, where it plays a role in how quick we recover from something.
Yeah, it's amazing how interconnected everything is.
Mhm.
As we're wrapping up today, I'll ask you any last thoughts you'd like to leave our students with? Thank you so much because we have so much to sit with and fold into the next activities. But yeah, any departing thoughts for our group?
I would say, I think something that I like that you said earlier, that you were like, it's cliche, but just a reminder that everything ends, right? The difficult moments that we might be experiencing, and just like the really exciting and beautiful moments also end. But there's also a lot of beautiful things that can happen in between that too. I think in the times where I felt that life, where I was at my deepest and darkest, there was also beautiful moments that I wasn't able to see because it was so overshadowed, right, by this thing that I thought was negative and bad. But there are a lot of beautiful moments in life that exist. We just have to give space to everything.
That's beautiful. And that makes me think it goes all the way back to mindfulness too, because it's giving ourselves the gift of the present moment, no matter how we feel in that moment. That moment is beautiful. Thank you for that, Dana. And this has been a beautiful conversation with you. Very much appreciate your willingness to visit our class. For folks in the class, if you see an opportunity to take a class with Professor Castro, sign up because you will not be disappointed. Wishing you all a good week. I will put some of our options for activities into our module as we always do. So looking forward to engaging with you around that. Everybody have a great week.
Mm.